Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something really fascinating and, well, still quite mysterious for many folks. G-spot orgasms and female ejaculation.
Mhm.
We've got a really interesting source to unpack. It's greatlevers.com's guide to G-spot orgasms and female ejaculation,
Mhm.
updated back in the early 2000s.
Right.
Think of this as your kind of fast track to understanding these aspects of female sexuality, separating fact from fiction,
Yeah,
and maybe even opening up possibilities for new kinds of pleasure.
exactly. And this isn't just like abstract theory. The guide is designed to be practical, really breaking things down.
Uh-huh.
It blends anatomical explanations with, real personal experiences, and importantly, it gives you exercises you can actually try.
Okay.
Our goal here is really to pull out the most valuable bits from it for you.
Now, a quick heads up about the language in this source.
Mm-hmm.
The author, they intentionally use more informal, even explicit terms. You'll see words like cock and pussy. And this isn't really for shock value. It's meant to keep the tone open and, well, sexual. The author believes this encourages a more uninhibited mindset when exploring these topics. It's a deliberate choice.
It's a very conscious choice, yeah, to create a sexual rather than a clinical atmosphere.
Yeah.
The feeling was that makes people more receptive to learning and, exploring.
Right?
So if you hear some of that direct language, that's the reason behind it.
Okay, got it. So what exactly are we going to explore from this guide? First, let's get a clear understanding what female ejaculation actually is.
Good starting point.
Then we're going to dive into the insights from this women's survey in the guide, their real-life experiences with G-spot orgasms and female ejaculation. That sounds fascinating.
It really is. Thousands of responses.
Wow. And we'll also look at some of the hands-on techniques and exercises for women that the guide recommends. And maybe briefly touch on some pro-sexual herbs and supplements it mentions too.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's get right into it. What is female ejaculation?
Well, this is where a lot of the historical confusion comes in. Female ejaculation has often been, either sensationalized or just dismissed as like urination or incontinence.
Right.
But the guide really points out there are distinct differences in appearance, smell, even the chemical makeup compared to urine.
It's kind of surprising when you think about it, isn't it? That it was just dismissed like that.
It is.
The guide even mentions this dismissive attitude, suggesting it might have stemmed from some kind of male insecurity, this idea of, oh, now they can ejaculate too. What's that about?
Yeah, like a threat or something. It seems like maybe a lack of understanding or perhaps feeling challenged by a fuller picture of female sexual capacity just led to it being ignored or mislabeled.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And the guide also raises an interesting point about potential anxieties,
Like what?
Well, if female ejaculation is presented as something all women should experience, it could inadvertently create pressure on those who don't, make them feel, inadequate somehow. Ah, okay. But the guide frames it more as part of a broader understanding of women's capacity for pleasure, right? Alongside multiple orgasms, G-spot orgasms.
Exactly. It's about expanding knowledge, not setting new benchmarks for what's normal.
Right.
And what's fascinating here is the guide's take on the medical community. It suggests that doctors haven't always been, well, super informed on this, often defaulting to, oh, it's just urine.
Really? Why would that be?
Well, the guide suggests medical training often focuses more on disease and basic reproductive function, maybe less on the nuances of sexual pleasure and response.
Uh-huh.
If detailed research wasn't a primary focus, doctors might just rely on what they were initially taught, which might not have covered this in depth.
So pleasure itself wasn't always central in medical education, potentially.
It really highlights how medical science has, historically anyway, maybe prioritized disease over sexual well-being sometimes. And, as the guide notes, women's health issues in general haven't always gotten the same spotlight as men's. Now, this isn't exactly a new concept historically, is it? The guide touches on some older perspectives.
No, not at all. This isn't some recent discovery. The guide highlights that ancient Chinese Taoists apparently called it the yin tide.
Yin tide. Interesting.
And in Eastern Tantric traditions, the fluid was known as amrita, like divine nectar. It was even seen as beneficial for both partners.
Wow.
So the author of the guide kind of proposes that these ejaculatory orgasms are more of a forgotten ability than some new thing.
A forgotten ability. I like that framing. Okay, so the guide also tackles some common questions. Let's start with the big one. Where does this fluid actually come from?
Right. There's been a lot of debate. And given that the volume can sometimes be pretty significant, the guide mentions amounts from A teaspoon up to maybe a cup or more.
A cup, seriously.
Yeah, that's what it says. So you can see why some people thought it must be urine.
Definitely.
However, the guide states that lab tests have shown its chemical makeup is actually quite similar to male prostate fluid.
Okay, so chemically similar to male ejaculate components.
Right. That similarity strongly suggests, a shared origin or function beyond just waste expulsion. It really counters that old, it's just urine idea.
That's a key point.
Hmm.
So if it's not urine, what's the prevailing theory in the guide?
The guide explains the main idea is that the fluid comes from the periurethral sponge. This is seen as the female equivalent of the male prostate gland.
Okay.
This sponge is located behind the G-spot and has lots of these periurethral glands, which are structurally similar to the male prostate glands.
Gotcha.
So the idea is when the G-spot is stimulated, this sponge gets engorged with fluid, and then at ejaculation, this fluid is expelled through the urethra.
Makes sense. Does the guide mention any other theories?
It does mention an alternative that it might be chemically altered urine, but the author doesn't really support that view based on the evidence presented.
Okay. And back to the amount, a teaspoon versus a cup is a massive range.
Exactly. The guide emphasizes that the volume varies hugely, just like ejaculate volume varies in men. The average mention is around 2 or 3 tablespoons, but yeah, it says it can range up to a cup in a single session for some.
Wild. Okay, so here's probably the biggest question for many. Can every woman do this? Does every woman have the potential to ejaculate?
This is where it gets really interesting. Even if, solid scientific proof for every single woman is still maybe evolving, the guide draws on Taoist and Tantric beliefs.
Right, the Amrita idea.
Exactly. Those traditions suggested all women were capable of these sacred orgasms. But the author does acknowledge physiological factors play a role, like the size and number of those periurethral glands might differ between individuals.
There's some anatomical variation.
Yeah, but the author's personal belief, expressed in the guide, is that most, if not all, women probably have the capacity and can learn how to experience it.
That's quite an optimistic view. Did the guide mention any specific research? I think you mentioned Spain earlier.
Yes, it references research by Francisco Cabello Santamaria and Rico Nestors in Spain. Their work apparently suggests all women might actually ejaculate, but the amount produced and the ability to actually expel or squirt it varies a lot.
Ah, okay. So maybe some women ejaculate, but just a tiny amount they don't even notice.
Precisely. That could explain why some women only notice a few drops, while others have a much more, noticeable release. The guide suggests this might even be the explanation for that wet spot some women find after sex. Maybe it's just a small amount of ejaculate that wasn't forcefully expelled.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it's not always the dramatic squirting movie scene.
Not necessarily, no. And here's another fascinating point from the guide. Once these ejaculatory orgasms start happening, they can apparently become more effortless.
Effortless, how so?
Unlike, say, conventional orgasms that some women feel they need to consciously work towards sometimes, the guide suggests ejaculatory orgasms can become more of an automatic, involuntary response once the body learns the pathway.
Wow, that sounds pretty amazing, actually. Okay, so we've got a better handle on what female ejaculation is, where it might come from, who might experience it. Now, the guide survey thousands of women sharing personal experiences. Let's get into that. What did they actually say?
Yeah, this survey is just a goldmine of real-life accounts. The guide presents excerpts the author felt were representative of the majority. But remember, this is an anonymous web survey. Over 10,000 women sharing some really intimate stuff.
Okay.
What you see is this huge spectrum of experiences, but some definite themes pop up, like the speed and intensity of G-spot orgasms, the surprise of the first ejaculation, and just how many different ways stimulation can lead to these experiences.
Right, direct from the source. So what were some common descriptions of the G-spot orgasms themselves?
Okay, one recurring thing was how fast they could happen. Many described them as almost instantaneous, without that slow buildup you might get with a clitoral orgasm.
Instant, wow.
Yeah, often surprising and tending to last longer too. Some women mentioned shudders and chills, describing the spot as super sensitive and the feeling as incredibly pleasurable.
Instantaneous and longer lasting sounds like a winning combo. Were there specific ways people triggered them? Positions, maybe?
Position seemed key for some, yeah.
Yeah.
Woman on top, sometimes leaning back got mentioned. For others, the absolute best orgasms involved hitting both the G-spot and the clitoris at the same time.
The combo platter.
Exactly. That simultaneous stimulation seemed to just amplify everything, with some describing it as a melting feeling.
Melting, that's evocative.
Yeah.
What other key things came out of these personal stories?
The intensity and where the sensation was felt. Women often described it as deep inside, a really strong feeling that could be amazing, but also sometimes almost too much, like wanting to push away for a second.
Intense. Okay.
Descriptions of vaginal walls contracting downwards, the whole body trembling. For some, the G-spot orgasm became like the main goal, and they felt something was missing if they didn't have one.
So it could become a really desired outcome for some people.
Yes, potentially. And there were some really specific stories, too. One woman said she could only achieve it during intercourse in a particular position with a certain kind of penis shape. Otherwise, it was fingers or vibrators.
Interesting how specific it can be.
And that first experience of ejaculation often mistaken for peeing, like we talked about.
Right. Must have been a bit startling. What about other ways people got there?
Fingering was mentioned quite a bit, sometimes leading to like uncontrollable leg shaking and just super intense sensations.
Uh-huh.
One woman described it starting as a tingling in her tummy, shooting down her vagina, making her whole body shudder. Oral sex and masturbation were also common pathways, sometimes resulting in just a trickle of clear liquid after a really powerful orgasm.
So lots of different triggers. Did people really emphasize how different these felt compared to, say, clitoral orgasms?
Oh, absolutely. Some women explicitly called it a full-body orgasm, totally distinct from clitoral stimulation. They felt it involved internal muscles, their whole lower body, sometimes their entire body.
A full body. Wow.
One account memorably mentioned a disgustingly large puddle during oral sex, leaving zero doubt about ejaculation happening.
Huh. Okay, that's pretty unambiguous.
Others experienced it basically whenever they climaxed during oral sex or right when their partner entered them. Simultaneous orgasm and ejaculation were also reported.
How do they compare them quality-wise, G-spot versus clitoral?
Well, for some, G-spot orgasms were definitely seen as superior. They described total body tension, a feeling of the vagina sucking, tingling from toes to head, breathlessness, toes curling, cramping, feeling shaky afterward.
Sounds really profound.
Yeah. One woman who'd never had clitoral orgasms found G-spot ones incredibly warm, with her Kegel muscles pulsing strongly.
So a very internal, deep experience for many. What about the actual sensation?
Descriptions like a deeper orgasm, almost like a mountain crumbling, versus the waves in an ocean of a clitoral one.
Mountain crumbling. Vivid.
For some, it felt almost like an out-of-body experience, nearly uncontrollable, but intensely pleasurable. One really unique story involved feeling it during a movie, sitting on a partner's lap, and eye contact actually enhanced it, making it feel more relaxed than a typical orgasm.
That connection aspect again. Interesting. What about duration or intensity?
Yes, some described G-spot orgasms as more powerful, with slower muscle contractions leading to longer, more pleasurable experiences, although sometimes harder to achieve.
Harder to get to, maybe, but worth it.
That seems to be the sentiment for many. Best results often came from direct contact masturbation or oral sex. A dripping sensation afterwards during masturbation was also mentioned.
So again, not always that dramatic squirt. Could be more subtle.
Exactly. And the survey responses just really show the incredible variety. Some women said it happened every time I have a really big orgasm, while others only experienced it a couple of times when they were, quote, coming so much and so hard I was out of control.
Right.
The partner's reaction sometimes got a mention too, like being surprised by how wet things got.
It sounds like for many, it was a clear marker of reaching a particularly high peak of arousal and release.
That's a great way to put it. The responses just covered everything,
Yeah.
from feeling kind of like you're peeing, but you let it go and it's great, to feeling numb but amazing during sex from behind, to one super intense one that felt like it lasted 10 minutes.
10 minutes, that's
Yeah,
significant.
it really is. There were also accounts of just gentle pressure working, though maybe less preferred than clitoral focus for some.
Mhm.
Feeling it deeper in the stomach or pelvic area, feeling more romantic, like the partner was part of them. And for a few, it happened every single time they were fingered.
The sheer range is just striking. It really hammers home. There's no single right way to experience this stuff.
Absolutely. And it just reinforces how vital self-exploration and open communication with partners really are. These stories bring it to life way more than just theory can.
Okay, so the guide also talked to men about their experiences with female ejaculation. What do they have to say?
Right. The men got one main question. Have you ever been with a woman who experienced female ejaculation? Their responses, fewer than the women's obviously, were pretty revealing too.
What kind of reactions did they have? Surprise, Confusion.
Some mentioned initial surprise, yeah, maybe even shock the first time, but overwhelmingly the experience was seen positively.
Okay.
One guy reported that he now manages to help his partner achieve it consistently through, like, extended arousal and teasing, bringing her close several times before she lets go.
Interesting technique.
Others just mentioned significant wetness and shaking in their partners, basically interpreting it as a sign of intense pleasure, like, wow, the sex must be great.
So generally a positive indicator for the male partners surveyed.
Definitely. Some responses were really enthusiastic things like, wow is all I can say, and it was the biggest turn on ever.
Huh.
One man described his partner spraying all over me after like 3 hours of oral sex. Another recalled his partner wet herself in me during orgasm while making love on a car bonnet, of all places.
On a car bonnet. Okay, these are vivid descriptions. It sounds like for these men, it was generally pretty arousing and positive.
That's the definite vibe from their answers, yeah. It kind of challenges those earlier ideas about potential male insecurity. It suggests for many men it's actually a major turn-on.
Okay, fascinating. So we've heard from women who've experienced it, men who've witnessed it. Now the guy gets practical, especially for women. What are the key takeaways on stimulation and techniques for actually achieving G-spot orgasms and female ejaculation?
Okay, number one, the guide really emphasizes self-exploration. Fundamentally important.
Makes sense.
It encourages women to dedicate time to understanding their own bodies, experimenting with different kinds of touch, pressure, all over, genitals included, with a mirror, without a mirror.
Getting to know the landscape.
Exactly. And incorporating fantasies, porn, whatever, helps discover what's personally arousing.
You need to know your own buttons before you can tell someone else where they are, right?
Precisely. The guide also highlights vibrators as a really valuable tool for the self-discovery. Trying different types, exploring sensations, again, stressing that self-exploration mindset.
Okay.
And it introduces the technique of peaking.
Peaking, what's that?
That's where you repeatedly bring yourself right to the edge of orgasm, then back off, then edge again.
Edging.
Sort of, yeah. Building that sexual tension to make the final release way more intense. And it helps you learn your body's signals.
Peaking. Sounds like a good way to build anticipation and learn your arousal patterns. What about specifically finding the G-spot? The guide gives tips.
It does. It notes that a higher level of arousal often makes the G-spot swell slightly and become easier to feel.
Okay. So being turned on helps.
Definitely. The instructions usually involve inserting fingers, palm up, towards the belly button, and then feeling around on that front wall, pressing, maybe wiggling.
What does it feel like?
Often described as spongy or maybe a bit corrugated, different texture, and pressing it can sometimes trigger that feeling of needing to pee. Different body positions might also make it easier to access.
So it might take some focused searching and maybe experimenting with positions. Once found, what about techniques for G-spot orgasm self-stimulation?
The guide suggests getting really aroused first through clitoral and vulvar stimulation.
Right.
Once you're there, then apply that pressure and wiggling motion to the spot you found.
Got it.
And again, you can incorporate that peaking technique to heighten things. Using a mirror can also be helpful, apparently, for visual feedback.
Visual feedback.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, what about specifically aiming for ejaculation through self-stimulation?
Okay, this builds on the G-spot techniques. The guide advises recognizing that gotta pee feeling as a potential sign it might be coming.
Don't hold back.
Right. And it recommends emptying your bladder beforehand just to ease any anxiety about what's coming out.
Good tip.
Setting up comfortably reclining, sitting, maybe with that mirror and a towel nearby. Build arousal through peaking and G-spot stimulation. Then, when that urge hits, or as orgasm starts, the key is to relax the pelvic floor muscles.
Relax, okay.
And gently push out with the vaginal muscles. Kind of like you're trying to expel a tampon. Experimenting with internal G-spot vibrators, maybe adding external clit stimulation or even anal stimulation is also suggested.
It sounds like it's really about tuning into those specific sensations and learning to respond with relaxation and tension rather than tensing up.
Exactly that. And the guide also really encourages women, once they feel comfortable with these techniques themselves, to share this knowledge with a partner.
Communication again, so crucial. Now, the guide also dives into pro-sexual herbs and supplements. This is interesting territory. What kind of things does it mention?
Yeah, it covers quite a range, and the author notes many could potentially benefit men too. First up, basic hydration.
Water.
Yep, drinking enough distilled water daily. Seen as crucial for lubrication and making ejaculatory fluids. Also recommends a good quality multivitamin, multimineral.
Basics first.
Right, then it gets into things like L-arginine. That's an amino acid meant to increase blood flow, enhance sensitivity, potentially leading to more intense orgasms, maybe helping ejaculation. B vitamins for energy and stamina, vitamin E for hormone production, niacin for circulation, which might intensify orgasm if taken beforehand, though it warns about high doses and potential liver issues.
Okay, so some focus on blood flow and general vitality. What about specific herbal remedies?
Avena sativa wild oats is mentioned. Supposedly increases sex drive and lubrication in women, maybe helps female ejaculation. Catawaba and Damiana also listed for libido. Dong quai is suggested for regulating female hormones, alleviating dryness, but it's described as a tonic, needing daily use. Then there's epimedium leaf, better known as
Horny goat weed.
that's the one. Touted as an aphrodisiac, increasing sex drive and orgasm intensity pretty quickly.
Can't argue with the name.
Yeah.
Any others stand out?
Murapuama extract for sex drive and blood flow. Saw palmetto berries extract for balancing hormones, maybe increasing breast size daily, though it advises pairing it with testosterone boosters to avoid hair loss, interestingly.
Complex interactions there.
Schizandra for increasing sexual fluids and endurance. Yohimbe is mentioned for erections and ejaculation in men and blood flow, lubrication, sex drive in women, but it comes with a big caution about side effects and avoiding it with high blood pressure.
Right, yohimbe can be intense.
Definitely. The guide even gives a recipe for honeymooner's tea to replenish sexual energy, and it mentions topical creams, like one called Her Turn, to enhance clitoral sensitivity.
Wow, that's a whole apothecary. It's really important to stress, though, like the guide itself probably does, that this isn't medical advice, right? People should talk to a doctor.
Absolutely crucial. The guide includes a clear disclaimer saying exactly that nothing in it is medical advice. Always seek guidance from a physician before trying these things, especially supplements or herbs.
Very important point. Okay, the guide also talks about strengthening sexual muscles. Why is that relevant here?
Well, the guide explains that strong pelvic floor muscles, the PC muscle, vaginal anal muscles, are really vital for strong orgasms generally, but especially for ejaculatory ones.
Makes sense, the expulsion part.
Right. So it details various Kegel exercises, quick flex, slow flex, super flex, and push-out exercises, gives recommendations for reps, progression. You can do them with or without fingers or a dildo.
Standard Kegels. Does it mention anything else?
Yes, it highlights a device called the Kegel Master 2000. It's described as a progressive resistance device for vaginal muscles.
Like weights for your vagina.
Kind of. It claims to be more effective than just Kegels by increasing blood flow and sensitivity, leading to a tighter vagina, stronger contractions. Recommended for use before intercourse. It even includes a quote from Alicia Klass, an adult performer known for ejaculation, endorsing it.
Interesting. Okay, moving beyond the purely physical, the guide also hits on improving communication. Seems essential.
Totally essential. The guide stresses taking responsibility for your own orgasms. That means knowing yourself through exploration and then communicating openly and honestly with partners about what feels good, what doesn't.
And definitely no faking, right?
Absolutely not. The guide strongly advises against faking orgasms because it just gives false feedback and hinders genuine satisfaction for everyone involved.
Such a key point for healthy sex. And it even gets into voice and dirty talk.
It does. It talks about developing a deeper, more resonant voice, breathing from the diaphragm, suggesting it can be really powerful and attractive. Gives exercises for men and women. And it encourages learning to talk dirty in a way that actually resonates with your partner. Being intuitive, but also just asking what they like and don't like. Gives some examples of phrases, too.
Using your voice as another arousal tool. Makes sense. And finally, creating anticipation.
Yeah, the guide explains that building anticipation is just key for increasing desire. It gives techniques for both men and women using verbal hints, descriptive language, promising a surprise.
But you have to deliver the surprise.
Crucially, yes. The guide stresses you must follow through. Gives examples for different scenarios, hinting during dinner, suggestive comments at home showing how planting that seed of expectation can really boost arousal.
Like foreplay starting way before any touching happens.
Yeah.
Mental stage setting.
Exactly. And following through builds trust, keeps the technique working long term.
Well, this has been a really comprehensive deep dive into this guide. We've explored G-spot orgasms, female ejaculation, busted some myths, hopefully, looked at a huge range of experiences, practical techniques, all straight from the source material. Listeners should definitely have a much richer understanding now of the potential for these kinds of experiences.
Indeed. And maybe that brings us to a final thought for everyone listening. How openly do you currently talk about your sexual desires and experiences?
Good question.
Could exploring some of these self-stimulation techniques we discussed, or maybe just having a really candid conversation with your partner, could that unlock some new dimensions of pleasure for you?
Something to think about.
The power to explore and understand your own sexuality and your partner's, it really is within your reach.